Congreso Mundial de
International Conference, the World Conference on Bioethics here from Gijón, Spain. And in the next minutes, we're going to have Dr. Devline Sowoya, a doctor in medicine and director of the Alinafe Hospital in Malawi. My dear Devline, it is a pleasure to have you with us. You have a very important panel to moderate, and I would like to ask you to finish the entire group with 2 or 3 minutes in advance so that our technicians can prepare the panel for the next. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I take the pleasure to thank Dr. Mateo Pachaparasias with the entire organizing committee for this, once again, beautiful organization. The organization is meant to steer the world in the right direction. Our theme for the conference is Global Commitment on the Rational Use of Biotechnology in Medicine and Environment. The theme of our conference speaks volumes on the need for a better world. And this morning, our first speaker is Mr. Carlos Romeo Casabona. He is from Spain. Mr. Casabona is professor of criminal law at the University of the Basque Country. He is also a member of Bioethics Steering Committee of the Council of Europe and also the advisory committee member of European Commission for Science and Research of the European Commission. The presentation this morning is a legal framework for artificial intelligence and health. Mr. Casabona, take the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning to all the participants in person or otherwise. I would like to thank the moderator for giving me the floor and for his introductory words. And I wanted to extend my gratitude and send my most heartfelt greetings to the director and president of this conference, who remains loyal to his commitment in organizing this conference and showing that the true strength of people make things move forward in spite of the challenging situation that we're facing at the time. And I want to say hello, Natalia Lopez Morataya and Ricardo Lorenzo, my two co-speakers in today's panel, both of which have worked with me over the course of many years. Now, without further ado, the moderator has already mentioned I will speak about different aspects with regards to intelligence, artificial intelligence, and the perspective around topics of law. Let me start by mentioning potential of AI, artificial intelligence in medicine, healthcare. As we all know, the potential applications of AI in human activities are almost endless. In the area of health, the utility of AI is increasing by the minute in an expansive manner, especially thanks to the ability to manage enormous volumes of data, also known as big data. And this is one of the greatest advantages of the ICTs, information communication technologies, and artificial intelligence more specifically. Just to provide a few basic examples, AI can become even more prominent in the future in digital clinical histories, digitalized images, and other information databases that can be optimized through very complex and powerful algorithms. So we can say that we're still at the advent, at the beginning of the use of artificial intelligence in the field of medicine, in spite of the great progress already achieved. There are a number of instruments, such as the big learning and the machine learning, which are innovations that add up to this whole um, group of instruments in artificial intelligence, which can be very useful for legal analysis of these. With regards to machine learning, it provides a possibility for the AI system to learn by itself by using data, by using big data. And therefore, it doesn't have to be reprogrammed by a human being because the system reprograms itself. Then there is another instrument which is based in artificial neural uh, network mathematic models inspired in the behavior of human neurons. The machine's activities can be improved by using the examples provided during its programming. This is a very important issue so that AI works properly. We need to feed it very carefully, prevent negative, undesired consequences that may lead to um, the problems with the results, biased results, and also a biased operation. Algorithms can uh, manage a high number of variables that are not accessible for classic programming, even if we use very powerful computers. So the success of these algorithms is based on the aforementioned factors and the availability of the big data, the massive data, as well as the capacity, processing capacity of algorithms. These are two key factors to understand this new era of knowledge and knowledge application. Let's take a look at the risks that may be posed by these technologies with regards to the rights of persons. These tools are a decisive step towards future autonomy of intelligent systems. So this is not an isolated subject, but it has to be regarded within wider, broader framework. We are currently working towards achieving greater autonomy of these systems. By autonomy, we mean independence of what programmers devise or design during the programming phase of these devices. And on the other hand, it also implies a lower dependence of IT professionals that are in charge of these technologies and tools. This is an important philosophical topic relative to the control of human being in this technology. And in my brief presentation, I will only be able to touch upon some of these concepts. But in any case, I do believe that this is one of the foundations for ethical, legal, and even philosophical discussion of the significance of the corporation of powerful artificial intelligence systems that are autonomous in our daily lives and also in professional activities in the future, in the near future in our society. There is an open question still that may be a cause for concern, something that is quite sensible for, or yes, sensible for legal professionals is the process by which an AI reaches a conclusion to make a decision. This limitation of the knowledge we tend to say, what is the logic followed by this AI system to reach a certain conclusion and reach a certain decision? Well, this knowledge limitation is very important for future discussions with regards to legal liability in any of its dimensions, be it civil law, administrative law, or criminal law, especially if it is legally required to establish to identify a causal link between the procedure used by the system and the results that may have an effect on people. And these would lead us to something that I will not delve into, which are moral responsibilities of robots and other AI systems. This is already being addressed by philosophers and lawyers alike. Artificial intelligence and robotics in medicine can lead to health professionals making decisions that have an impact on patients with objective have them benefit in terms of their health and physical condition, but it can also help solve certain situations where uh, it, where there are a difficulty. For example, during diagnosis, using artificial intelligence systems may help us provide precise diagnosis. What would be the adequate treatment um, in the light of that diagnosis? What could be the cause of the disease, and what the forecast is for the evolution of the condition? Um, and also helping selecting specific treatment and what the results will be. So there are many, many questions on the table. So what are the problematic issues with regards to law? They are various and different in nature. First of all, let's talk about anonymous or pseudo anonymous data. Let's not forget that anonymized data are protected by the law. These data belong to a physical person, natural person, and they can actually be identified relatively easily. So that is one of the consequences, the fact that these people can be re-identified or identified relatively easily. And I stress the word relatively. Let us not forget that health data are um, enjoy a maximum protection by Spanish law, as well as general regulation on health data protection of the European Union of 2016. So the consequences of these technologies, especially with regards to big data and data mining, allows us establish relationships or links between the data and the uh, person in question. So this kind of information is called metadata. Secondly, we're talking about the protection of the information, but let's take it a step forward. Something that is important for law and legal professionals is um, decision making strictly based on automated processes. Once the patients are profiled, classified in different groups or subgroups, so the procedure, the decision is more based on the characteristics of the group or subgroup that person, that specific patient has been assigned to, rather than basing the decision on the specifics of the patient, um, on the details of that particular case. And this is one of the greatest risks when it comes to technology when it comes to IT and data processing, be it personal data or otherwise. And this is precisely one of the great concerns of the 2016 Data Protection Regulation by the European Union, which prohibits making decisions that are exclusively based on the creation of profiles, of general profiles, the allocation of people to groups or subgroups. And it also states, or it also deals with it relying excessively on automated processes, meaning automated decisions as a consequence of patients being classified by groups. Another issue and is trend towards decision making that is purely based on the algorithmic proposal of an AI system, which could regulate and even replace the decisions of a medical professional. This is an important problem, and this information could be used to make a decision without necessary justification, especially when it comes to difficult and complex decisions that are the result of complex processes. In these cases, automation must be nuanced, not corrected, nuanced, and of course validated by medical professional. I think that's going to be the role of future professionals, and not trusting AI systems blindly. And I think this is one of the challenges that we are already facing. In administrative terms, people may say, sorry, we cannot do that because the computer or the system doesn't let us do it, or this is what the computers say. Let us not forget that human beings must um, remain in control of, um or must remain in significant control of these AI systems and of robots. Let us turn to the risk of identifying or allocating patients to groups or subgroups depending on their uh, characteristics, and this could lead to discriminatory decisions, could also result in discrimination against some patients when decisions are purely based on automated process profiles created. And I reiterate the role of the European Data Protection Regulation, which also governs these. And then the process by which an AI system reaches given conclusion. What happens here is that the proposal is made by the AI system, but no significant information is provided with regards to the causes, the causal factors on which that decision proposal is based. And that may result in a risk of medical professionals not being able to validate, confirm, or disregard reasonably the AI proposal decision, is what I was highlighting earlier. It should These decisions should remain in the hands of doctors, as helpful as AI systems may be. If we think about health professionals, if a healthcare professional is not very well acquainted with decisive elements used that can make a process of the AI system, and they do not know why that specific decision was made, it's going to be very difficult for them to validate that decision. If it doesn't make sense to them, they cannot validate it, but they also don't know what's behind that reason, what's behind that final decision. So I think this is a challenge. The fact that these processes have to become more transparent, and at least we should know the uh, most relevant milestone decision making process by AI. The law can provide answers, yes, but this is a new technology, so its way of operating can um, pose a challenge for current legal instruments. I would say that without prejudice of some future adaptations that will have to take place, the European framework of the data protection, data protection regulation, and the related decision making processes when it comes to AI systems or IT, ICT systems, I believe that these regulation can help to provide adequate legal framework, um, and one that is kept up to date. Could happen. It's already happening in some areas that it is out of. Let us not forget that in Spain we have an act, data protection act, personal data protection act, and guarantee of digital rights, which implemented or uh, transposed the European regulation, and it governs some um, health related issues or healthcare related issues, more most specifically for the purposes of biomedical research. I think in this area, the Spanish Act is more accurate, but still somewhat vague and open. But I think it opens the door to govern and regulate research, which is one of the fields of um, application of artificial intelligence. And when we're talking about sensitive data, such as genetic data or otherwise, um, we should achieve a certain degree of flexibility or limitation of the rights of um, people when it comes to their own data if they are going to be used for research purposes. And that is something that is reality that is already happening. And perhaps it could have been more clear, Spanish Act, because it states that access to um, or that a researcher um, undertakes to not searching the personal data of a subject, patient in uh, research. Well, I think it should be more strict. I think Spanish Act should be more strict. Sometimes Spanish regulator, Spanish legislator the does not consider consulting with the legal professionals, with the jurors, while drafting bills, acts, and I think that there is qualified staff, qualified personnel who could be consulted um, during the drafting of these acts in order to avoid inaccuracy or vagueness in the legal text. There are many other things that could be addressed from the legal point of view, but I will stick to the allocated time. And additionally, I think that I did have sufficient time to just touch upon some of the most important topics area. And let me finish my presentation by uh, referring to the European Group of Ethics and New Technologies, which is an advisory body for the president of the European Commission. It's a multidisciplinary independent group of which I am a member, and I think I would like to highlight something that is important, and I would like to make very clear. We have to sustain, to maintain that human control on management of these tools. That is all. Thank you very much for your attention, and I remain at your disposal should you have any questions, and I will be happy to discuss with
Thank you so much, Mr. Carlos Romeo Casabona, for the wonderful speech that you have given. I'm sure there are a lot of comments, a lot of questions, but in the interest of time, let us take note of everything as we go to our next speaker. And then at the very end, we can present our questions or comments. Our next speaker now is Ms. Natari Lopez Morataya. She is also from Spain. And Ms. Nataria is the professor of biochemistry and molecular biology at the University of Navarra. She is also honorary president of the Association of Bioethics, Association of Bioethics and Medical Ethics, that's AEBI. Her presentation is on the rational order in responsible biotechnology research. What is this? Before what would it save us? At this point in time, Ms. Nataria, please, this is your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Mr. Marcelo Palacios for having invited me to participate in this great event. And greetings to all participants and all the followers and attendees. Now, well, you will watch the video that I had previously recorded. Responsible biotechnological research means what is it and what it will be useful for. Since 1977, I started work on biological odontology and bioethics. Up to date, 2021, the world scenario has changed a lot due to the development of biotechnology. Before, some issues as environmental or climate change was not addressed, and there were no basis of molecular biology regarding the evolutionary process and epigenesis. And on the other hand, the issue of energy crisis posed then, on the one hand, the reduction of birth rate that has been faced by Western countries. On the other hand, we face the boom of the nuclear plants and the posterior closures. A turning point was the Chernobyl catastrophe. April 1986. Human failures are risks that always exist. And the background issue that was not solved before was what to do with radioactive. What happens the sun should not be brought down to planet Earth without solving the resulting almost half a century. An individual and social commitment has been reached with sustainability of nature, and even new study matters have been created. A new sensitivity has risen towards the pain of animals, and also some people are talking about rights of animals, and therefore human species is science that it is responsible for the destruction of the planet. COVID-19 has meant has meant forefront the concept of One Health. The world movement that is aiming at a change. It is a health crisis and also an environmental crisis. Human health cannot be separated from the control of European countries. And on the hand, we have to take care of the environment. We are committed to create an awareness that to avoid that people get sick, we have to change our. It is necessary and urgent to stop deforestation and environmental degradation, avoid trade of species, have a world alert for the early control of pandemics, etc. Our relationship with animals close, we share spaces, etc., etc. And some people live together with their own pets. There are diseases that are transmitted from men to among individuals to human beings, for example, different pets. For example, the ticks. Climate change and the changes in landscape, the loss of forests, for example, or some bushes are also lost, and that gives way to the fact that the new species of ticks disseminate and they reach some areas where they did not that they were not inhabited before. And vets warn that we have to carry out dispersation projects throughout the year. However, due to many social cultural factors, we are still looking to the other side. The economic power has made that, has acted in such a way that did not want to look for solutions. The idea of a flexible fertility, however, has not been for free, and its cost has to be paid. More specifically, in terms of quota, more than 100 million women worldwide are using anticonceptive tablets, and usually most of the formulations are the EE2, which is excreted from the female body together with other natural estrogens, and they go through the residual waters, rivers, trees, lakes, etc. And the compounds are disruptive and they are affecting fish and also the male fish that are drinking those waters. So those waters are very much polluted. The power of this compound EE2 is great. It is a generator that becomes a threat to wildlife and fishing activities. The European Union announced the intention of regulating this compound in the framework of the Water Framework Directive. The European countries were asked the following. By 2021, they had to limit the quantity or the amount of E2 in water, an annual average of 0.035 parts per billion. That means little, but not. Pharmaceutical water environment post norm is that the compliance is very, very. Are we ready to pay? Would it be better just to do away with environmental harm or damage as a tail risk or cause flexible fertility by means of the anticonceptive treatment? Of protecting the environment against this contraceptive is clear, but the understanding of our will as a society today for that protection is not so clear. Is there any measure, any guideline in terms of the technological power over nature? Bioethical questions regarding the human being handling of nature find a solution and response. We can identify the good that is at stake. Any kind of ethical statement, debate should try to cover the natural meaning, trying to avoid that trend of considering as an isolated material or a neutral material or a physiological process that makes no. So we have two solid statements regarding the position of uh, man, the cosmos. The natural world is the world that belongs to man. The natural world is the ontological pathway that has led appearance of man. Can deduct some out of these statements criteria that guide an action in a non-destructive way. On the one hand, it is important to take into account because the man's world, man needs this world to live, the biological being. The natural world is a common legacy. The criteria in terms of practical usefulness or term are not sufficient to assess the ethics of human activity on natural world. On the other hand, it is important to take into account that the relationship of man with the world, the norm that may order things, may organize things, taking into account the meanings and the values that are found in the world. The of the natural world built on human reasoning. Order has not been established by reasoning. We have found it as such. We have found those beings, organization that is not given by human reasoning. And the only guarantee for we have that action of human beings over the natural world is not destructive depends on the natural meanings, the natural values by trying to submit them to a certain usefulness or program. We continue with questions. Our first proposal means to accept that positive science always has to listen to the message given by the natural world. Not everything is made by means of just one single mechanism. There are processes, there are mysteries. Man has its own position in this world. However, technological power may turn us blind because, and with that aim is to try to make matter for the artificial construction. We have, well, been movements or ecological movements that show that nature is not something that we have available and that we can use depending on our own interest. However, they kind of equal human reality to the rest of reality. Full of responsibility refers to the fact that exploitation in such a way that the environment is degraded and therefore less natural. That is the way to destroy the environment. So the demand is a demand of being faithful to reality, handle reality as it is, not trying to impose your own rules. It only makes sense depending on the sense I give first distinction that we may infer that the natural world is one thing and the artificial world is another thing. Man makes artifacts, but however, the form and matter are not intertwined in such a way that uh, they know each other. However, they are strange to each other. For example, a specific matter can have a certain shape. For example, a piece of wood can become a table, and at the same time, a table can be made of marble or any other component. They are forms thought by smartness, not the intelligence, the human being, and then induced in a matter that was extraneous at the beginning. Other things that cannot build without taking into account the natural laws, for example, that of gravity. A Gothic cathedral, for example, should always take into account the gravity law, and that is why that becomes very natural, has a beauty there. Beauty is very natural, and also the construction style is very efficient because it is taking into account the natural laws. So it gets closer to the natural world and not so much to the artificial world. So this mentality, this mindset that we have to construct artifacts cannot change with regard to the natural world because the natural world has its own characteristics. We have not set those characteristics. We know them, but we did not construct, so to speak, or design those characteristics. On the other hand, in the natural world and world side, we're going to not establish a relationship between the inert world, most nature, inert, versus the living. There is a general rule according to which when a system is complex and it is made up by interactive pieces, well adjusted and regulated among themselves, they all contribute to the basic function. And we cannot delete any of those components because if we do so, the system will stop functioning. So the system is acting as a single unit, a very close relationship between all the components. When the net world materials do not have their own information, what happens? They acquire a certain shape and some characteristics depending on the means or the environment. For example, these whole compounds, for example, depending on how you shape it or structure it, then you may get a diamond. Or if you give it a different shape, then you would get a graphite. So it all depends on how you handle it, manage it, and it cannot be reproduced because you cannot convey or own. The in being, on the contrary, has its own information, DNA, genetic heritage that has grown throughout the years. And this has been inherited by the parents. This is transmitted. It is what we call informative material. And this informative material includes an inner material that is non-material message, certain characteristics. So it is made depending so the basis of informative material, lower level we call it. Then it is retrofeeding of information, and that is what we refer to as epigenetics, and we are generating the level middle, and then other characteristics that it results in a unity that allows it to live and transmit life. That is the most complex level that living being now is already on the interior level. The more complexity and autonomy from the means environment, more epigenetic. When you have more capacity of retrofeeding that basic information, then you gain in terms of vital capacity, competence. Why? Well, because the living in, whatever it is, processes information. And therefore, there is an epigenetic process with interactions between structures, same process. And all this leads to new capacities. Biological life values are very important because our aim is to get to know uh, criteria, a real criteria. I've seen that the more autonomy, so environment, more oneself. That is, that you can take most advantage of that genetic program. For example, the different living beings have different biological identity, different way of life, greater or lesser dependence from the exterior, etc. In fact, all the most of the information breaks down into two, and then you pass part of that information. Then they will multiply themselves. An unicellular organism is self-sufficient to perform all the vital functions, specific functions. A plant, for example, does not have any instruction, does not have any activity or self-movement, and they live physically linked between the soil and the air. Animals, depending on the scale, are gaining more autonomy from the environment and therefore more themselves. They are more themselves. Thus, in terms of autonomy from the environment, they do have more autonomy. More with more or more with less genetics, for example, say. And that is the man. Why? Because the man, as well as processing information, the man processes some singular information that has to do with his relationship with the environment, with the others, with other individuals, how to transfer knowledge, etc., etc. Have information of a human being that is developed further the basis of the relationship. Living being, non-human one, environment reference is a biological mind with certain behaviors and trends. However, in man there are some gaps or it's broken. It's, it is not a continuum. And demand, because of that relational information, breaks with the stimulus load and also the response. So that is, we enjoy freedom, autonomy per se, autonomy from the environment. So the more autonomy of enjoyed by a living being, more man that living. The values of biological life, well, we have more epigenetics, more capacity to regulate gene expressions, etc. Well, the vision of the world then is a vision of the world as one unity. Everything affects. The world is full of significant creatures and meaningful creatures, and they have been organized with harmony to try to give way to that order. The order of the universe is not something exterior, but rather interior, ulterior, but rather interior, that is organized, that organizes what already exists, but rather it is inside. So the living order all the branches of the tree of life, let's say. Then epigenetics grows and elaborates further. In the end, what we have is a big and a branch that used to be the branch of primates. Now we have the man. The man needs the world, and the order we have in the world is the world of the free man, and this has been given to us. The non-human beings, however, the human corporal life is kind of embedded, and in such a way are presented to us are goods per se. They are not free. They cannot decide, so they do not have autonomy. They have autonomy. They they have in themselves, not per themselves. So just the world has an ontological relationship towards the man, the of life in every branch, the autonomy of the environment, above all through mammals, and the depth of that aim towards the free is vertebrating the whole universe. That is the norm. A question that is usually asked whether animals enjoy rights or have rights. There are two different positions when answering the question, very far from each other. One mentions that animals cannot be used for human whim for a reason, mainly because if you do so, you are dehumanizing the man. The man who behaves badly towards the animals becomes a nasty being, no? Ugly being. Okay? We're not saying that the animals now are like sacred beings. And the other position, following this other position on interest. as if you damage them, you are causing pain. The man also knows suffering, so you know what you are causing, the suffering, the pain. So whatever positioning you prefer, the aim or the result of both of them is the same, not to harm animals. With Peter Singer and his work, animal liberation starts a movement, above all the labs where we work with animals. No, I only work with rats, though. So this liberation, animal liberation movement kicks off. They say, or he says, Peter Singer in his book, that they are like us, they are living beings, and there is no radical qualitative difference between them and us. Plants do not suffer pain, so they are not taken into account. And the author said that the should their own right, and the man is like an unfair exploiter. These people who belong to this animal liberation, well, are asking for the liberation or the freedom of those animals that are cages, etc., etc. For example, in our university, well, we had to close down an animal room that we had, no? And obviously, we also have the industry, the feather industry, leather industry that had to close down most of it as well, no?
So if we take a look how how man can resort to animals and use them and tame them, helped by them, or to be accompanied by them, it is contrary to human dignity to make them uh, suffer without purpose and without the need to do so. There is a call to feeling here on this slide. There are very significant tests or experiments in which a relationship is established between the dog and the um, person who takes care of the dog. They cannot talk to each other, but let's take the sample of an 18-month baby. Um, they have a relationship with the person who takes care of them, even if they cannot talk to each other. So there is a relationship there. In conclusion, vital phenomena have a very wide framework of significance. It's not the same suffering, one that is experienced by a tree or a dog, and they're not equal to um, human suffering or animal pain. Man is made to work, and since it works, it is or he is not subject to material conditions of the environment. And because man works, he is free of automatism, of animal specialization, is capable of creating techniques, education, and culture. Schumacher, on his book Little and Beautiful, roughly translated, focuses on the essential aspect of achieving better education, better lifestyle, in which, together with developing new production methods, there are new ways for consumption. And it doesn't make sense to speak of man's dignity without accepting that it must be a noble being. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Natalia Lopez Morataya. I'm very much sure that the presentation has been very detailed and very, very much interesting also. For those of us who have questions, comments, let's save them for the end. At this point in time, we are going to have our third presenter, who is Mr. Ricardo de Lorenzo. He is also from Spain. Mr. Ricardo is the lawyer and doctor of law. He's also a member of Madrid Bar Association, also the president of the Spanish Association of Health Law. And his presentation this morning is Health Law in the face of advances in biotechnologies in medicine and environment. Mr. Ricardo, please take it.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Professor Sowoya. I would like to thank my dear friend Marcelo Palacios for the success of this conference and the high level shown by all speakers and participants, as well as the opportunity that he has given me to participate here next to prestigious Professor Lopez Morataya and also Professor Romeo Casabona, who is a reference in the world of health law from its very beginning. And it's been a great satisfaction for me to meet him. In this conference, he looks exactly the same as he did 20 years ago when we met on our first national conference on health law. Now, without further ado, I will delve into the topic of my presentation, health law in the face of technological progress, medicine, and the environment. I could add a sort of subtitle to my presentation, which would be health, law, and biotechnologies. Do they complement each other or do they conflict with each other? My talk would be based on the connection between law and science, and I must confess that as I was preparing for this intervention, I was recalling the 1960s, a period of my life when I was a teenager, and I had to make a decision as to what to study. The question was science or humanity, and that is a heartbreaking decision for such a young person. I chose the latter, and I focused my career path in law, and now I have to uh, find the connection of with science. Let me try and see if I can do it. I remember a few words by Benito de Castro, a law philosophy professor, stated that future development, uh, human activity on its environment is subject to the application of biotechnological applications, both industry and agriculture, together with cattle raising, amongst others, are fields of experimentation of biotechnology. Specifically, in the field of medicine, the progress of biotechnology have made it possible to achieve unimaginable results both in the diagnosis and treatment. However, currently, biotechnology is paving the way for unprecedented possibilities in human welfare and well being, but an uncontrolled application could also be um, hidden enemy that could uh, strike great damage to humankind. One hears over and over again that using technique or that technique and technology should be serving human beings, but we are serving more and more technology. We need to ask ourselves, um, do we really want to serve technology, we need to find reasons to exist in our relationships with everyone else environment. We're not only responsible for our own lives, but but also the lives of those who surround us. But we have an even greater responsibility. We're not only responsible for human generations, but also planet Earth, everything on it. Only in the past decades, science has evolved unprecedentedly field biotechnology. And human, sorry, scientific research has been focused on human life, human beings. And we have reached such levels of intervention in human life and technification of human environment that these research successes are cannot be compared with anything achieved in the past. However, this has not happened overnight, but rather throughout a number of different stages until the 20th century. The paradigm was based on identifying all research developments as magnificent event. Human being regarded itself as something that was separated from nature and was supposed to dominate it after the advent of war technologies and nuclear technologies, nuclear energies. There was a higher awareness of scientists with regards to the ethical consequences of their work. After the 1950s, the public opinion uh, started to leave behind the previous paradigm and started to think more about the ethical consequences of these phenomena, especially in the face of an increasingly damaging um, human action towards the environment. Later on, we became more convinced that the development of humankind was purely based on scientific and technological development. However, the current context is different. We no longer find faith in science as an instrument to evolve as human beings, but rather we aim at achieving a better world. For example, with the advent and increase of what has been called the medicine of desire. Although human beings have modified actively nature over the course of centuries, never before have we had tools to redesign nature at the speed and depth that biotechnologies allow us to. Science has to define to what extent the use of biotechnologies can impact the rights of human beings. Let's take a look at rights. A right to a satisfactory quality of life. This is the materialization of Article 25 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And we can regard this as a complementary right and also a complementing right of the basic right to life. The right to the environment, I have previously mentioned the advances in medicine and the relationship with the rights of people. And now I have to refer to the environment. Biotechnological progress has made it possible for the industries to mutate and genetically manipulate plants, animals, and even human beings. So we fear and this fear is not unjustified, that these technologies reduce biodiversity and end up having negative, irreversible effects on nature. Some are convinced that uh, biotechnologies can be a powerful ally, but there is also the fear that this ally can end up becoming a terrible enemy that cannot be surveilled. Another right, the right to psychophysical integrity. There is no doubt that biotechnologies pose a challenge, but it also intervenes in the vital equipment of a person. Sometimes the use of biotechnologies can be aimed at achieving scientific, social objectives exclusively, which are not easily justified in terms of ethics. The right to freely develop one's personality, the right to, or this right can only be affected negatively by technologies if the autonomy of a person is violated, if they are, well, in certain cases, the use of biotechnologies could be justified by uh, reasons that are reasonable. The right to genetic legacy, which would be the second to last right that I will address. Can we talk about a right to a genetic patrimony or heritage? We need to be careful and not um, overstate the genetic heritage as a supreme asset, a supreme value, which is a property of the entire humankind. Let us not sacralize genetic heritage, as Professor Romeo Casabona has said when he talked about a genome. It seems obvious that resorting to this right is a border towards the future. Freedoms have freedom of speech, freedom of thinking, have uh, been have played an enormous role for the integrity of individuals or social systems. Although throughout history, freedom has been the drive of the progress of humankind. Research will have to be respected and promoted as a basic value of an open and progressive social organization. And now we analyze the limits of ethics and law. There are many ethical doubts, and the feeling that a certain degree of legal action is required to ensure human dignity. Science and technique have a dual aspect. On the one hand, they contribute to human development. On the other hand, they can also pose undesired consequences for humankind, especially if there is no control or there are political or economic interests in place. I believe
Quiero comenzar poniendo
I would like to highlight as a legal professional, as a lawyer, and I would like to make a statement as we think about these issues. All activities on humankind have a bioethical component, which was highlighted and it was made legally binding by the European Council with regards to the protection of human dignity and human rights in applications of biotechnology in medicine. The Asturias Convention, which was signed in Oviedo, and the result of great work performed by Professor Marcelo Palacios. And its spirit is embedded in a Spanish act that regulates the patient's autonomy. This convention highlighted the need to protect human rights, its dignity, and identity, guaranteeing that everyone's integrity and fundamental rights will be respected in the applications of biomedicine and biotechnologies in medicine. But what is the role of the law as a social discipline? We can conceptualize it as as a group of rules and principles that govern and regulate the organization of a state or of society. In line with this concept, biolaw would be the field of law that deals with legal and judicial aspects involved in the problems around human life and life in general. I will uh, talk about this concept because it's rather close to the concept of health law. Genetics, medicines, and new technologies. Fundamentally, computer technologies have revolutionized human reality. L- Limits have been surpassed in laboratories and they have penetrated into our everyday lives. One is stunned or astonished by the expectations raised or the feeling that a certain legal intervention is required to ensure human dignity. And that is something that you can perceive on a global basis. Let me highlight that there is an inherent ethical component in law. And let's not forget about this, but this discipline is atemporary and cross cutting, as many of the speakers have already shown during this conference. On the other hand, critical situations um, show that this approach is reinforced by the needs and the demands raised by society. Law as a branch of human knowledge
va muy por detrás del avance.
is lagging behind scientific progress, and as such, many of the current situations cannot be regulated by the law. The law has not adapted to the social reality yet. So, as a humble legal professional, I believe we should examine bio laws and bio law from an exclusively empirical point of view, because in those subjects relative to bio research or bio bioinformation in clinical systems, we should guarantee the rights of um, patients and health professionals. Given that my talk is entitled Health Law in the Face of Technological Progress, we all know that there is a constant tension between ethics and scientific progress. This is a conflict that has been discussed openly over the past years by different sectors of society, from scientists to lawyers, including bioethicists and even politicians who represent the citizenship and as such cannot step away from these debates. There is an excessive fear of scientific progress, which moves forward unstoppable. And as such, scientists and lawyers have to work together in seeking the desired balance between progress and dignity, between research and fundamental rights. The solution is not to put hurdles to these activities, but rather to direct them and combining them with the protection of dignity and the right to protect human health as regulated in Article 43 of the Spanish Constitution. Some say that human rights were created in the 18th century and they became increasingly part of legal systems. But human rights are intact and inherent to human nature, as stated by most international declarations. If this is true, human rights was created at the same time as humans. It seems that human rights are uh, confused with declarations of human rights. The declarations were created in the 18th century, but human rights exist from the very beginning of our existence.
Ciudadanía de atónita avances.
We are witnessing spectacular progress and that were unthinkable just a few decades ago. Through medical technification, we um, play with life and death with organ transplantation. We play around with other techniques, and we perform interventions that could only be dreamed of a few years ago. For example, intervening a spina bifida in a child. Bio law is wondering whether, in the face of an increasing power of science and technology in human life, everything that is materially possible, is it ethically acceptable? If so, as a lawyer, I must add, what are the limits? All these issues pose intense questions to legal professionals. And this is so because the dignity of man is at stake together with justice, health, and life itself, solidarity, ethics of our society, and all in all, an important part of the future of humankind. The question here would be the following: is it possible to create a legal framework to control biotechnological applications? Biotechnological applications are a good tool so that all human beings can enjoy their primary rights fully, but they will not be fully legitimated as long as there is a risk and a certain risk to provoke um, damage to people. The interest or objective of humankind is life, which is the decisive and supreme um, criterion for the evaluation of all technologies. let us be careful. Not everything that is scientifically possible is ethically acceptable. We are spectators, but we must remain vigilant so that we don't become mere instruments of scientific progress. The word progress was written in capital letters at the beginning and then in small letters, and now we use quotation marks. That shows that we are not fully convinced that the conquest of certain things can be defined as such, or at least that we're not fully convinced that we must not remain vigilant. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you very, very much, Mr. Ricardo de Lorenzo, for a very wonderful presentation. At this point in time, we have listened to three presenters, Mr. Carlos Romeo Casabona, with his presentation on legal framework for artificial intelligence and health. Then we had also Ms. Natalia Lopez Morataya with her presentation on the rational order in response to biotechnology research. And finally, we just had Mr. Ricardo de Lorenzo with a presentation on health role in the face of advance in biotechnology, in medicine and environment. At this point in time, may I also open the floor to the general public in case we have some questions, comments, and other reflections that we have to make to our three speakers. Thank you. Reflections from the presentation.
A todos.
Okay, thank you very much to everybody. It has been a very important panel addressing different topics. Highly interesting. Thank you very much to Professor Romeo Casabona, Professor Natalia Lopez Morataya, Dr. Mr. Ricardo de Lorenzo, and our chairman, Mr. Devlin Sowoya. We have to continue because we have another panel now, and otherwise we will be with some time limitations. Thank you very much, of course, for your contributions. And thank you very much for having contributed to our aims, the aims of the Congress, that is the scientific knowledge aiming at combining ethics, safety, efficacy. Thank you very much to you all. Good morning. Marcelo Palacios, President of the Scientific Committee of the SIBI. Apologies because due to technical issues, well, there has been a little delay. Apologies. We're going to start now with the next panel. Professor Amos Sapira from Israel will be the chairman. He holds a chair on law at the University of Tel Aviv, and he will introduce the speakers, as for example, Ms. Svetlana Pustovic from Ukraine, Beatriz Dominguez Miguel from Spain, and Mr. Daniel Piedra Herrera from Cuba, and Ms. Victoria Camps from Spain. So we now give the floor to the chairman. We cannot hear Mrs. Svetlana. I think Mrs. Svetlana Pustovic could start.
Everything okay? Everything okay?
Yes, you can go ahead. You can go ahead. You can go ahead. I'm sorry, apologies.
Okay. Dear colleagues, buenos dias. The topic of my presentation is the model of health as a patient's everyday world. Everything okay? Okay, do you hear me? Okay, okay. Today, especially under the influence of the coronavirus pandemic, the philosophical problem of substantiality, a new model of health, is urgent. The patient's everyday world, Lebenswelt, is in philosophy, is different from the world of science, the world of medicine. This is the everyday world of personal experience, communication, solidarity between people. It is feelings and awareness of the value of corporeality, freedom of choice, integrity. The individual is aware of the world as consisting of many realities. First of all, it's the reality of everyday life, which is ordered, systematized, presented in models of understanding, narratives, and representations. The life world is that place where the question of the survival of mankind can be raised in the context of global bioethics and on a global scale. As it turned out, the paradigm of health as the absence of disease does not give us such a guarantee. Physician as an expert has medical knowledge and the patient can listen to him. But this does not mean that he is superior to the patient in life experience and wisdom, understanding of the inner picture of the disease, the good style and way of life. The patient is no longer a patient, but simply a customer of medical services, a consumer. In future, official medicine will not oppose everyday life, but will be its harmonious fragment of or measurement. Patient in future, I suppose, will stay at home and decide for himself what services to choose and how to receive them. An increasing part of medical services will be provided at home. Ernst Cassirer, in his fundamental work, Philosophy and Symbolic Forms, showed that scientific objectivity is opposed by another type of objectivity, mythological and symbolic. Mythological thinking is the inner essence of man, characterizes the world of our immediate everyday experience. Experience is the primary and most concrete way of human existence in the world that runs in its self-expression, a historical and biographical event in the world. While scientific knowledge and research are a secondary product of human existence in the world, the life experience is a primary and most concrete way of human existence in the world. A characteristic feature of the primary human situation, the human fundamental situation, which was discussed by Heidegger, Adorno, Arendt, and other philosophers, it is anthropological weakness and fragility. Fragility expresses and shapes possible life experiences and embody in the ideas of the kingship of life and death, the danger of freedom that reveals the reality of evil, the defeat of solidarity and impartiality of others, communities in relation to the individual, and so on. In our opinion, in order to return the humanistic meaning to clinical practice, it is necessary to go beyond understanding its purpose as exclusively the fighting against disease and abnormalities, and bring a positive meaning to the doctor's understanding of complexity, non-linearity of life, social, cultural contexts and patterns, life situation, connection of individual and universal values. In modern philosophical ideas about the being of health based on the ideas of phenomenology, existentialism, hermeneutics, health is a value, a life experience, experience of corporeality, life path, freedom, coexistence. Health is not a feeling and not a desire, not an opportunity and not a need, but a condition and freedom to be here and now, to live every moment of subjective life as a unique coexistence, a way to realize the intersubjectivity or activity patterns and understanding. In fact, it is co-presence, coexistence in the world, people with other, with animal, with nature and other things, cultural artifacts. Philosophical foundations formed the modern view to health as everyday life, like health model as everyday life. Both phenomenology and existentialism address to the problem of the spiritual experience of the patient's care for their patients' care for their health, aimed at interpreting this experience in terms of human subjectivity, freedom of choice, existential meaning, and so on. According to German philosopher Thomas Rensch, man is rooted in a fundamental life situation, which indicates the most obvious and indisputable fact of his presence in the world, the elementary fact of his sensory bodily existence. In his book, The Constitution of Morality, Transcendental Anthropology and Practical Philosophy, Thomas Rensch proposed 11 components of the actual fundamental situation of man: situationality, human life, factuality, verbalization, possibility, loneliness, temporality, community with other people, intersubjectivity, and others. As we can see, this meaning of the human fundamental situation is revealed through multiple existentials that represent the totality of human life. Individual difficulties and problems, facts of biography, marital status, features of disease and treatment create a unique configuration of the fundamental life situation of a person. The ontology of the fundamental life situation of the patient explains the variety of modern models, concepts of health: consumer, psychosomatic, biological, bioethical, ecological, based on the attitudes and values of transcendental anthropology. In the bioethical model, health is seen as the result of the realization of the value and principles of bioethics in the doctor-patient relationship. In the patient's attitude to nature, other people, to his health, to his life, bioethical principles contribute to the individualization of medical ethics and the integration it into the structure of the patient's values of preservation and development of health. The concept of the social role of the patient is revived, which is beginning to be considered as part of the expert system along with other elements. Health professionals, members of ethical committees, sponsors, and centers of medical researches, etc. The concept of human health as a life vault, Lebenswelt, as a space for implementation of life strategies for maintaining health as a subjective experience, when subjective experience become a reality, which eliminate new opportunities for the therapeutic process, development of new models and concepts of health and healthcare delivery system, organization of healthcare system, improvement of existing health models based on a better understanding of the patient's inner world and states. It seems to us that the bioethical paradigm of Porter and model of health as life experience, life world, can join the values and meaning of the everyday life world and the process of scientific knowledge in the field of medicine. Thank you for attention.
Thank you so much, Svetlana. Now we will give the floor to the next speaker, Ms. Beatriz Dominguez Gil, who is General Director of the National Organization of Transplants in Spain. She will address the non-commercialization or non-trading principle of substances of human origin. Welcome to our Congress, Dr. Dominguez Gil. You have the floor. We cannot hear the doctor, unfortunately. Can you hear me well? Can you see my presentation on the screen? Can you see the presentation? No, we cannot see the presentation. Yes, but we cannot see the presentation, unfortunately. Well, hello and good morning to you all. Thank you very much to the organizers of the Congress. And more specifically, thank you very much to Mr. Marcelo Palacios for having invited me to be here and for allowing me to address this principle of non-commercialization of substances of human origin, focused on mainly organ transplantation or organ transplant. The first transplant of organs that was implemented or performed with success goes back to 1954 at the Hospital Brigham in Boston. And in a natural way, they solved previous transplant trials, no? Because the previous transplant had been rejected by the receiver. This was the first success, and the first transplants that had to be performed only in those patients that were lucky to have a specific gene non-affected by the same condition. And at some point, we have to wait for donation of the children, as in the case of the twins that you can see on the slide. But then many advances have happened thanks to immunosuppression, reduction of the inocesporine in the decade of the 80s, important technical, ethical, organizational advances, and therefore the transplant is now important in the modern medicine that improves quality of life and prolongs the expectancy of life. We can obviously, well, have a look at many articles regarding expectancy, life expectancy. We can see transplant of bone marrow, 35 years more, transplant of heart, 30 years more, etc., etc. But transplant also presents some singularities. Every year, more than 150,000 transplants are performed, 4.8% increase versus 2018. And however, there are still global needs, and these needs will increase progressively in the future years as the consequence of the progressive aging of population. And this offset between offer and demand is the main cause of future practices that may harm or violate, even if you wish, some main fundamental human rights. There is also a biological risk. Infectious diseases, for example, COVID-19 from one donor to a receiver when transplanting lungs, but also they can transmit tumors, for example, here, transmission of poliocarcinoma from a donor. This risk cannot be eliminated. It will never be a risk zero. But if we comply with some requisites, we can minimize it because we can select better donors and we can have better traceability programs. And therefore, transplant is a very regulated, highly regulated practice nationally and internationally.
I will refer to three key documents, international documents, and they all share the non-commercialization principle. These are the principles of the World Health Organization from 2010, which is a non-binding document for the member states, but it has been profoundly influencing in professional practices in a national context. Principle number 5 states that cells, organs, and tissues will be donated gratuitously with no pecuniary payment in consideration. You know about the Oviedo Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine, which is a binding document. 29 member states of the Council of Europe have ratified this document, and it states that the human body and parts of it will not be object of trade. There are several European directives. The functioning treaty of the European Union only allows the European Union to regulate in terms of quality and safety requisites or requirements. Regardless of this, and in order to guarantee quality of the substances for clinical use, these directives specify that donation must be or mustn't be paid for. I encourage you to read this interpretation document by the Council of Europe, which specifies that the objective of this principle is the respect of the human dignity, a genuine consent for the donation, and a free decision, as well as respect for the corpse of the deceased person. This is also a principle to promote donation, organ donation. It is important to state that the Council of Europe clarifies that there are practices that are compatible with some of their principles. For example, paying the donor for a loss of profits or costs incurred during the transplantation process. And this document urges states to act in cases where, for example, a person who is is a donor of an organ must not be economically benefited from the transplant. But this document captures a payment for the medical services or other related technical costs. The Council of Europe has ratified and strengthened this principle, but it's also very clear on this principle. It states that violating the non commercialization principle must be prosecuted if violated, which is ratified in the Santiago of Compostela Convention, which obliges member states that ratify it to pursue to prosecute this crime and protect the victims. More than 20 countries have signed this convention, and 12 have ratified it, including Spain. Article 156 of Spanish Criminal Code punishes organ commercialization, and with a penalty or a sentence of up to 12 years of imprisonment. So the non-commercialization principle is adopted in international regulation, especially in the European context, where organ trafficking is a crime. However, it is a principle that is constantly threatened over time. The first threat is the proposal of the introduction of economic benefits to promote transplantation or organ donation. This initiative is raised especially by United States people. For example, Gary Becker, who was an economics Nobel Prize, he suggested to pay for $14,000 for a kidney, which would result in an increase in kidney donors in the United States without increasing the expenses in the transplantation system. These proposals have been made more sophisticated. Paying in cash for an organ can be refused or rejected by society. However, a list of very influencing figures in the United States wrote an open letter to President Barack Obama asking him to create an economic incentive program for donations, excluding cash payments. They suggested fiscal deductions, healthcare coverage, retirement pensions, or university scholarships, just to name a few examples. I'm going to state some arguments which are debatable as to why to refuse these economic incentive system. They are not unlike a cash payment because there is an economic interest, be it in the short, mid, or long term. Economic incentives will be more attractive for those who cannot afford, for example, a health insurance um, in exchange for a commodity, which is a kidney. And so this will no more be a free decision, but rather a decision motivated by socioeconomic needs, and it would be used more among the unfavored sectors of society in the favor of the wealthiest. Defenders of the system always argue that there will be an organization that controls these matters. However, it would not be able to control uh, all transactions, and it would not be able to prosecute them if they happened outside of the system. And there could be potential risks for recipients of organs. And in the context of organ trafficking, it is demonstrated that those who donate a an organ for economic reasons, for economic needs, tend to hide crucial information, crucial health-related information that may affect the recipient. Those who defend this economic incentive system tend to tend to claim that a dead person cannot be depleted or exploited. But in this case, the exploited people would be the family who is forced to donate those organs for economic reasons. So the system will be twice as unfair for those families because, or in the if there were contraindications. These are just a few examples. Some countries authorize and have legalized organ sale, such as Iran. Two-thirds of transplants of living persons are paid for. The Iranian Kidney Foundation regulates these donations, and once the matching between donor and recipient takes place, they can set a price, they can agree on a price if it is higher than the price paid or covered by the state. The system ensures health follow-up monitoring of the patient for the first year after the transplantation. Um, Iran has acknowledged the weaknesses of their system, but they have not changed it. And the profile of the donors is suspiciously similar to those who are victims of human trafficking or organ trafficking in other countries and tend to be motivated by a bad economic situation that forces them to make this decision. On the other hand, before introducing economic incentives for donation, we should ask ourselves if we're really complying with the principle of economic neutrality in donation. For example, in the US, a living donor incurs in an average of over $6,000 to donate as a consequence of traveling costs or loss of profit. So our proposal here is, before even considering the introduction of an economic incentive system for donation, we should eliminate disincentives for donation. This is not only a legitimate practice, but also a recommended one, and it should be taken into account in covering all of the costs incurred by a living donor, for example, traveling expenses, loss of profit, but also post donation or after donation follow up and um, clinical complications, as well as the acquisition of a life insurance for the donor. This is guaranteed in Spain, but there are other countries where a family that authorizes the transplantation or organ donation can incur in costs. So we are against economic incentives, but we support fully the elimination of economic disincentives or costs involved. I'm now going to talk about global kidney exchange. To understand this concept, we need to know what cross kidney transplantation is. When someone needs a kidney and someone close to them wants to donate their kidney to them, there is usually incompatibility between them. In cross kidney transplantation, we would have two couples that are not compatible with each other, but we match those two couples if each of them are compatible with each person of the other couple. It is complicated to manage this. You need a database with a mathematical algorithm that searches for possible combinations with a strict protocol and agency that would coordinate this. And these programs have been developed in North America, Australia, and in some European countries, including Spain, because it has one of the most robust cross-kidney transplantation systems. This is another economics prize Nobel from the US, and he was awarded the prize Nobel precisely for helping improve quality of life of people thanks to the application of his theoretical mathematical principles. And he made it possible to improve the matching algorithms in these crossed kidney transplantation system. From an economic point of view, the global kidney exchange is proposed by Rob and other professionals in North America as a solution to a healthy country problem and a poor country problem. This would be the cross kidney transplantation program, as I explained it before. And with this global kidney exchange, the aim is to solve the problem of a developed country that has a system in place. And their problem is that they need many recipient couples, they need genetically diverse couples, they need a zero group and donor universal donors, and among others, dialysis is associated with very high economic costs. What are the problems of a poor country, developing country? They may have donors or donating and receiving couples that are compatible with each other, but the problem is what the authors call economic incompatibility. Basically, they cannot afford the transplantation. So, with this global kidney exchange concept, the proposal is for the developing country couple to be included in the developed countries system to include a number of transplants, and in exchange, the developed country would cover the cost for the developing countries couple as well as an economic support upon return to their country. From a financial point of view, this idea is genial, and it is stated that if 4 transplants were achieved with this system, this would allow for each payer in the developed world to pay for 1.25 of the transplantation and improve the quality of care for the patients and reduce the overall cost. So, from a financial point of view, this will be extremely profitable and it will solve the problems of both a developing country and a developed country's couple. This idea seems genius, but from the ethical viewpoint, it has been criticized. First, we believe it is a violation of the non commercialization principle. It's a payment in kind in exchange for a donor that allows me to carry out several transplants in a developed country. So there is a risk of exploitation of donors and the recipients in developing countries. Additionally, the selection of couples is not based in a humanitarian criteria, but rather in the usefulness of the donor for the healthier country. For foreigner donors, it is difficult to identify if they are being subject to exploitation. And for the developed country couple, the life long care would not be ensured, and this could also lead to violation of solid ethical principles. Now I will address the medicalization of human origin substances. This is an initiative of the European Union, but also uh, it can also be found in other places of the world. Human cells are manipulated substantially and or subject to a given use. This system is different in other drugs because of its origin. They stem from human beings, and this has been acknowledged by the World Health Organization, which has specified a number of principles that should be applied to all medical products that stem partially or totally from a human body. There are three pillars: the protection of the donor and the protection of its dignity, together with the control of biological risks, and a third pillar. The European Union also acknowledges the exceptional origin of these cells. There is a specific piece of legislation applying to tissues and cells, and another one that applies to advanced therapies. But there is a common norm for all two areas with different norms. In Spain, the public health system follows the transplantation quality system. The transplantation is authorized by the competent authority, but the advanced therapy, on the other hand, is processed in GMP laboratories with the drug quality system applied, and its clinical use depends on the commercialization of the substance, with the exception of the hospital exemption clause. What are the challenges if human cells are regarded as a drug? From my point of view, we could ask ourselves if the non commercialization principle is violated. We are talking about the most expensive therapies currently, using a substance that a citizen has donated with no economic interest. It is hard to make the interest of the industry and the businesses compatible with the interest of a system, a healthcare system, and there could be inequity or lack of equity in the access to these therapies. It also poses a risk for the healthcare system because it's very costly.
Termino con esta imagen donde señalo cómo.
Let me finish by showing how Spain has achieved high donation and transplantation rates by adhering to the principle or complying with the principle of non commercialization. I think there are many reasons not to jeopardize a principle that aims fundamentally at respecting the human dignity. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your fast and clarifying intervention. Next on the agenda is Dr. Daniel Piedra Herrera, member of the Cuban Bioethics Committee and a doctor in chemistry, but unfortunately, he is unable to attend. He sent us his address that will be read by Jesus Aquilino Fernandez, a law philosophy professor at the University of Oviedo. Mr. Aquilino, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Marcelo. Good morning to all participants. I will now proceed to read the notes sent by Dr. Piedra Herrera, the title of which is Our Biotechnology Against COVID-19 from Cuba, his intervention on the 11th conference of the SIBI. Almost 2 years ago, a prestigious US journal published the article of a professor in the University of Akron, Ohio, entitled The Curious Case of Cuba. The curiousness of that case that was presented by Professor Keck may explain the current situation in Cuba when it comes to reasonable and responsible use of biotechnologies in the world's fight against the new coronavirus pandemic. Keck's arguments start by calling the reader's attention on the experience of the Cuban national health system over the past 5 decades. Public healthcare systems were included in the project of the welfare state that was born in 1942 during World War II in London. Welfare state would make it possible for all citizens in a country to have access to healthcare, retirement pensions, education, and social care regardless of social class, social background, race, gender, etc. So that was how this issue was addressed by Giovanni Berlinguer, a social medicine professor at the University of Rome, during his speech in the Fourth International Public Health Congress. Another delegate, the chief of the Special Analysis Program of the OPS, showed the dramatic situation in the American or Latin American continent with 892 million inhabitants once the neoliberal hegemony eradicated all of these expectations and hopes in developing countries. According to his statistics, the poorest countries of that sub-region were in a situation that was the same or worse than 40 or 50 years before. Child death rates was an indicator not only of health but also of the economic performance of a country. And in our region, poorest countries in 2000 had still not reached the child mortality or death rates that the richest and wealthiest countries had already achieved by 1950. That means that we have not been able to eliminate the gap that separates wealthy and poor countries. It is hard to understand how Cuba in the Caribbean Sea, um, very 90 miles away from the United States, which was still a poor country, a third world country by 1959. And after the Cuban Revolution, the country started walking into the future. And this curious case that it's now in his article from 2012, Keck refers to the more than 50 countries of political conflicts between the U.S. and Cuba, resulting in a long economic blockage, trade blockage, and financial blockage, which has been condemned by the Assembly General of the United Nations since the 1990s. In spite of everything, the national Cuban system's achievements and successes cannot be denied. Keck quotes another North American publication, which states that in virtually all critical areas of public healthcare and medicine, Cuba has reached an undeniable success, including, amongst other, the creation of a high quality primary care network and an unequal system of public health care, educating and training an expert workforce, sustaining and supporting a local biomedical research infrastructure, controlling infectious diseases, reaching a declination or to collapse in non transmissible diseases, and satisfying or catering to the healthcare needs in less developed countries. By 1965, the National Scientific Research Center was inaugurated, where I myself was trained as a biomedical science researcher, and I was able to observe and partly participate in the advent of molecular biology in Cuba. We imported European consultants, and we sent our youngest scientists to other countries to be trained in new sciences and technologies. After the 1950s, research centers multiplied and were able to carry out industrial development and production work. Since then, Cuba has been creating its own vaccines, defying the US blockade. From the very beginning, Cuba aimed at becoming a sovereign in the production of technologies which required fundamental research. These would free us from the limitations of the technologies manufactured by the big capitalist corporations. Currently, Cuba participates with a prominent role in the fight against COVID-19 based on the principle of sharing what we have and not giving what we lack. The health Cuban staff in the Henry Reeve Brigades have provided support in over 70 countries in the fight against this disease. On the other hand, the efforts initiated in 2020 with the first diagnosed cases of the new coronavirus and to find vaccines against the disease are reaching its final results. 2 out of the 5 vaccine candidates so far, Abdallah and Soberana O2, have already overcome the third stage in the clinical tests, and they are being administered massively through to all the Cuban population. Cuba has the necessary resources and capacities to create or manufacture 7 million doses for the rest of the year, and we will be able to make our entire population immune and even export our vaccine to other countries. These are the issues that I wanted to touch upon during my presentation, and we thank any comments, questions, or observations, if any. We will be glad to answer to your questions as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Fernandez, for conveying message written by Mr. Daniel Piedra. Now we'll give the floor to full Professor Victoria Camps, who holds a chair in philosophy at the University of Barcelona, permanent counselor of the State Council, and also member of the SIBI. We have learned a lot from you. It is an honor to have you, the same as the other participants. You have the floor, Victoria. Thank you very much, Marcelo. It is a pleasure to see you, even if it is through a screen, and also to participate once again at this Congress that the SIBI has been organizing for many years with so much love. My aim or target with this talk, I guess that you can see my screen, right? Could you please confirm? Yes, good. Thank you. Thank you. I hope I can handle it. What I'm going to do now is to focus on 2 ideas that have become fundamental and key related to ethics and bioethics. One, the duty we have to look after each other, take care of each other, and as an extension, also to take care of the environment. And another linked idea is the idea of responsibility. Let's address first the idea of responsibility. It is necessary to quote a book published by Hans Jonas in 1979, entitled The Principle of Responsibility. We have to say that in philosophy, few authors or philosophers, and not even in the field of moral philosophy, have devoted to the concept of responsibility, which is a much more legal concept. However, it is basic to understand the bioethic principles. Hans Jonas, in this book, referred to responsibility of human beings with respect to the future. That responsibility that does not only take into account something that has already happened, and we should, well, own or be responsible for, but something that has happened, for example, the environmental deterioration, but that obliges us to behave in a different way in the future. And therefore, it is a responsibility that is projected in 2 lines of action: guilt towards the past, but also responsibility towards the future. Jonas mentioned in the book that responsibility has an emotional basis. Here it was referring to fear, the fear of what may happen in the future, and this should become the first duty. I'd like to underscore this idea, the emotional basis of responsibility, because when listening to the previous speaker, the director of the transplant service or unit, she mentioned during her talk that economic incentives or financial incentives are not appropriate in terms of transplantation. This does not mean that we should not have other kind of incentives, no? And we should have ethical incentives. And the ethical incentive in terms of transplantation is solidarity, altruism. It is important to talk about feelings when talking about ethics. The rational calculations, purely rational calculations, is not enough, because practice has proven that we are not as rational as theory has told us. We do not only need reasoning. In the case of responsibility to the future, we also have to be cautious. We have to respect the future, but we also need fear of consequences, consequences resulting from some behaviors that are harmful. They damage nature, and they also damage human health, as we have seen in the case of the pandemic. And Jonas also says something interesting when referring to responsibility. That is, the model of responsibility should be the maternal or paternal child relationship. It is an archetype of responsibility because in the relationship between parents and children, there isn't a ethical, legal duty of responsibility, because there is a feeling of affection, of love, a feeling that has a biological basis, natural basis. Responsibility should be, well, taken in that sense, no? It is based on something that links us to other people or also to nature. And thanks to that link that has an archetype in that relationship between parents and children, we feel responsible for what may happen to the others and what also may happen to the environment. To summarize that concept of responsibility, Hans reformulates the Kantian categorical imperative. We know it very well. It is a criteria of morality that is a criteria to establish what is good and what is bad. And in the case of Kant, he says it acts in such a way that you treat humankind as an aim and not just as a means. This that may have a difficult understanding in a more popular kind of language, it is the same as saying, well, treat the others as you would like to be treated, which is the golden norm of morality. Do not manipulate the others, do not treat them as means, do not dominate them, but however, see them always as an aim in themselves. And that is the way Kant has to refer to human dignity. Every human being has a dignity. It means that every human being has to be seen as an aim in themselves. Kant reformulates that Kantian categorical imperative and to turn it into an imperative that refers to human responsibility to the future, and says the following: act as such that the effects of your actions are compatible with the human authentic life on planet Earth. So do not do anything that may harm, damage, degrade a real authentic life on Earth. I cannot move on to the next slide, unfortunately. Computer is not responding. And I want to associate this or link this to something that we know very well, those of us involved in bioethics. That is the definition of bioethics given by the promoter of this concept, a physician, Fangelshire Porter, who in 1970 wrote an article in which, for first time, it seems, used the concept of bioethics. And he said, I chose bio to represent the biological know-how, the science of living systems, and I chose ethics to represent the knowledge of a system of human values. And with this, Porter wanted to interlink the human values of ethics with biology. He wanted to join science and ethics. So the biological basis that also speaks about our vulnerability and fragility, that is the one we have to associate and relate to ethical values, two of which are the value of care and the value of responsibility. So it is a duty to take care of all human beings and also take care of the animal, non-human world and nature, living nature. And that duty of caring is a responsibility of all human beings. I will now refer more specifically to the value of caring. The ethics of caring is an ethics that has been developed very much in the last 50 years. It is something quite singular, if you wish. An activity such as caring, an activity that exists since the beginning of humanity or humankind, but however, it has not been acknowledged from a legal, social, political standpoint, and not even from an ethical point of view. It was a feminist, a psychologist, Carol Billigan, who 50 years ago manifested the importance of the care value, and he mentioned the following: caring is such an important value as justice. Gilligan connected that caring value to a typical female or feminine activity. It is women who have always taken care of others. And because it has always been a female activity, caring has not been acknowledged as a social value or an ethical value. It has been a value in the framework of the household that has always been invisible. It has to be with a non-productive life. and therefore this work has not been paid for. So that value, the value of caring that is at the heart of ethics, what they claim, feminists claim, is that it should be acknowledged, socially acknowledged, also politically acknowledged, and that it is seen not only as something fundamental when relating to others, that is something fundamental in the clinical practice, for example. Well, medicine does not only have to cure or heal disorders or conditions, but also take care of patients, above all, to take care of those whose disease cannot be cured. And at a time when the aging population is one of the phenomenon that should be of our greatest concern, because we have to be aware of the fact that this has to be handled as well without degrading human life. But that value and duty of caring has to be transferred to nature, generally speaking. It is our duty to take care also of nature. We have to defend caring sensitivity. This is said by a branch of feminism called ecofeminism. In Spain, there is a feminist, Alicia Pureo, who has focused on the development of ecofeminism. And she mentions feminism and ecology are a common cause. If women give a special value to caring, that value should not only be seen as something that falls on the shoulders of women, but rather it should be a universal value. That sensitivity has to be seen from the equality of genders. It also has to be an excuse to promote equality, gender equality. And outside the private sphere, it is a duty not only of the private sphere, but also it is a duty of public entities. Public entities also have to provide care that help families to take care of their relatives in the private sphere. And the political project that currently is a global project, that is what we call the ecological transition, to change behaviors, to change habits in such a way that we move towards more careful caring, that we take care of the environment. I've said many times when talking about this topic that if we take seriously that value of caring and the value of responsibility, we should move from the individualistic logic and the dominating logic that results from a liberal, selfish ideology, and also from a capitalist economic model focused on consumption. So we should move from that logic to a logic that should be called relational and responsible. It is a logic that instead of having as a starting point the person as an autonomous person with private interests, and that devote their lives to try to satisfy their interests without caring about the others. So we should move on to another kind of individual who focuses on the interdependence that joins us all. I think that this serious situation we are facing due to the pandemic has been an opportunity to showcase that interdependence. The virus, the COVID-19, has made us aware of the importance of taking care of each other, and that the relationship with the other should be part of our vision of ourselves as vulnerable beings, fragile subjects. And we have the duty of taking care of others, because also we, at some point in our life, we will need some kind of care. And I will move on to the last topic of my talk, that that is to consider the caring of nature and also the caring of others as a civic duty. If we want to go or move towards the ecological transition, if we want to try to construct and build ecological cities, we need to see that process and understand that process not only as a process that results from several legislative initiatives, projects, and institutional decisions, political decisions, but also as a transformation in terms of behavior of people. It is an ethical duty, let's say, that can be broken down into two parts. The first part has to do with convincing ourselves of the following: taking care of oneself also means taking care of others. We have to overcome that superficial and frivolous idea of taking care of oneself as just taking care of our own body, to try to be young forever and ever, and to have a very healthy life, which is good, but that is not the only meaning. When you look after yourself, when you take care of yourself, you have to also think that you are taking care of the other. There is no holistic caring of oneself if you do not include there caring about others, because we are interdependent. Because when you are born and when you die, everybody needs someone. Nobody is born being an independent being, and you do not die being fully independent. So you have to think ourselves as providers of care, and also as receptors of care. So we are caregivers and caretakers, let's say. And then we will have a more humble approach. The second part of that civic duty has to do with the change of habits. We have to recall that the term ethics and the term moral are translated from the very beginning of the times as habits, a way of being. And this is how the Greeks considered ethics, as a compendium of virtues or qualities or attitudes that constitute a special way of being in agreement, according to the Greeks, with the duty of citizenship. So we have to take care of our own interests, but also take care of common interests, which make up the common good. That means that we need to change habits. We have to adapt habits to this change, to this transition. And as I said before, to go from an individualistic logic to a more relational logic, We are always connected with others and with nature. And for that, we have to develop some virtues. I will just highlight 3 of them. One of them is compassion. Compassion is very important, which means etymologically to feel with, to feel what the other person feels. If you put the focus on caring, it is not possible to care without suffering when the other suffers. Whether the suffering is human suffering, but also if the suffering is animal suffering or environmental suffering, if you wish, or nature suffering. So if nature is degraded or harmed or damaged because of a horrible action of human being. Another term or virtue, moderation. We do not like talking about moderation. We live in a consumption society, and what we're used to is consuming and waste money, and moderation does not come into play. In ecological transition, we need to be more austere. We have to apply moderation. We have to be cautious with regard to the future so that future generations can inherit at least what we have had instead of a worse nature or a worse environment. And another virtue is gratitude, a feeling of gratitude or an attitude of gratitude to whatever we have. That probably is the precondition to be able to develop that feeling that is the basis of ethics I was referring to before, the solidarity or fraternity, if you wish. Concept of fraternity, I have always said, it is the forgotten virtue or the forgotten principle out of the 3 modern principles, freedom, equality, and fraternity. Equality has not has been developed a little bit, but fraternity not so much or nothing. So today we're referring to fraternity. We are again aware of the need of feeling siblings or feeling as brothers and sisters. We need to feel a bit deeper the relationship of proximity, closeness, to try to protect each other. And I will finish with a quote by Edgar Morin, a centenary philosopher, but is still alive, French. He has just published a book due to the pandemic entitled Changeons de Vouloir, Let's Change the Pathway. He also points at that change of or shift of paradigm. And he bets on a planetary humanism. We should move towards a conception of humanity, humanism, that would take us beyond even ourselves, a planetarium humanism with harmony. Everything should be harmonized. Or know that against individualism that has threatened us for so long. That is all from me. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Camps, for this talk that has given us a lot of food for thought. In terms of our evolution as a consequence of that pandemic, COVID-19, And somehow we have to change our mindset, no? And there should be a shift. During the Congress, we have talked about responsibility from other points of view. But now we have heard about a different kind of responsibility. But anyhow, responsibility needs pedagogy, and a pedagogy before the process. We need a pedagogy of responsibility understood as a habit. Because independently of the fact that the human being never has a grandmother, always has time to boast about himself or herself and talk about himself or herself, humanity is suffering from pollution, poverty, violence, famine, inequalities. Now we add to that climate change and the tragedy resulting from the climate change. They are scourges that are a consequence of that pollution of humanity. And therefore, it is essential to address the possibility of a new existential philosophy. And those of us who enjoy welfare, what are we ready to reject, to say no to, so that there is no environmental pollution, so that the others can also enjoy welfare, so that there is no gender violence, so that there is equality, not only in terms of economy, but in social aspects as well, men, women, gender equality. And what are we ready to share? And all that is embedded in your statements, no, or approaches. Now, I'm going to ask if there is any comment or any question. I can see there is no question here from the floor. And I don't know if we have any question from the social media, no? No, there is no question. Well, we have some time. So maybe if the speakers agree, you can exchange ideas, comments, suggestions, and we will be very happy to listen to you. If anyone would like to take the floor, you are more than welcome.
Victoria, thank you. Yes, Marcelo. I would like to say something. I have talked about the need for ethics to have reason, but also feelings, for feelings to be cultivated, to be nurtured. Perhaps we can think about uh, the fear to lose in our nature could be a feeling that we can nurture, that we can cultivate, because it will help us lead a more prudent life. I would like to ask Beatriz, the director of the National Transplant Association, is it hard to stay solidary, to maintain solidarity in order to lead a transplantation system that is a raw model, such as Spain's system? You were talking about that book, When Altruism Isn't Enough. It seems that the thesis here is we cannot trust altruism because we're not altruists, and that it is a complicated field. So how should we, or how do you proceed? What do you do in order not to lose altruism and to um, keep solidarity? That's a very good question. I think it depends on the context.
Sistema Nacional de Salud.
In Spain, we have a national health system that ensures care for anyone who needs it and access to therapy that is as sophisticated as transplantation with no discrimination whatsoever. So there is a concept of reciprocity, helping each other, and that's important because we all have to contribute as much as possible. And um, on the other hand, we pay special attention to tending to families during their mourning. We focus our attention during the mourn phase, not to get them to donate an organ, but rather to help a suffering family and help them think about what their relative, their beloved one, wanted or would have wanted, based on their principles and values. So, with this approach of providing information to the public on these uh, lovely gestures, the truth is that 86% of families agree on donating, and very often, um, in the closest circles, in the circles of relatives and in the family of a person who needs an organ, people tend to offer themselves as donors. There is the false belief that systems don't work because people don't want to donate, and that's not true. We are very much aware that our system needs to be well prepared to identify people who die, and could be a donor. And altruism does happen in those cases. Perhaps it is not reproducible in other fields, in other countries, in other contexts, but in our experience, by cultivating the principles that you mentioned, taking care of our neighbor, social responsibility, that kind of values, well, this has allowed us to achieve a level that has made us become a role model across the world. So why not having or including alternative incentives such as altruism and helping someone who is in need as an alternative to economic incentives? And as a matter of fact, families are helped in their mourning process um, um, when they agree on donating, and many of them thank us for giving them the opportunity to help a beloved one, help someone else. So yes, we keep cultivating and nurturing these altruist spirits, and we don't have the feeling that it's going down at all.
Victoria, muchas gracias, Beatriz.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Victoria, would you like to add anything to that? No, thank you very much. Thank you. Does anyone wish to add anything else? If not, I will devote a couple of minutes to read an address sent by the moderator of this panel who was technically unable to connect. And um, he was concerned that he might be regarded as rude for not participating, and so he has sent a few words. And in any case, Beatriz, my collaborator and a fundamental figure in the SIBI and in this conference, is going to read Professor Amos Safira's words.
Values of bioethics continues in the efforts to monitor the spreading of COVID-19, to learn its mutation and variants, and particularly to develop as fast as possible effective and safe vaccines, possess a potential for compromising basic human rights and individual freedoms, especially in the sphere of biomedical experimentation on human beings, imperfective techniques of anonymization of accumulated biomedical and social data, confronts privacy, dignity, and autonomy concerns of liberal democracy. An atmosphere of public health emergency, governmental, and certainly public opinion confusion accelerating competition between drug companies is highly welcoming to bioethical claims such as risks, benefits, calculus informed concern protection of vulnerable population, privacy, and anonymity. Let me propose, Dr. Marcelo Palacios, that our next Congress in Gijón will focus on this problem theme of bioethics in time of global pandemic. Profesor Amos.
Pues muchas gracias, Beatriz. Muchas gracias, profesor. Sabes lo que te espera.
Thank you very much, Beatriz. Thank you very much, Professor. And we regret that you have been unable to be here moderating this panel. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to Dr. Daniel Piedra as well. I believe that with your interventions, you have dignified and provided valuable content to this conference. We will certainly draw important conclusions. I think it's fundamental to say that everywhere on the world, your interventions are being followed throughout our website, and I am sure that positive conclusions will be drawn. Thank you very much, and see you soon.